Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku could give his quirk to others temporarily? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world resolved itself in a nauseating lurch of warped space and frigid water. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was standing on the solid ground of the USJ's Central Plaza, staring down the nightmarish portal that had vomited forth a legion of villains. The next, he was submerged in churning, unpleasantly cold water, his lungs burning for air he didn't have. He thrashed, his uniform instantly leaden, and kicked for the surface. His head broke through with a desperate gasp. The air was humid and smelled of chlorine and ozone. Towering above him was a massive, stylized shipwreck, its deck crawling with villains who grinned down at him with predatory hunger. Keikirojiri scattered us, he sputtered, treading water frantically. He scanned the area, his analytical mind kicking into a gear born of panic and adrenaline. The dome of the unforeseen simulation joint loomed over them, a cruel mockery of a sky. This was the shipwreck zone. He wasn't alone. Midoriya-chan! He turned to see Tsuyu Ajuri's wide, unnervingly calm eyes. She was a natural in the water, her movements fluid and efficient. A few feet away, Minoru Mineta was screaming, purple spheres popping from his scalp in a terrified frenzy and bobbing uselessly on the water's surface. Ajuri-san! Mineta-kun! Are you okay? Izuku called out, his voice trembling slightly. I'm fine, Kero. But we're in a bad spot, Tsuyu said, her gaze fixed on the villains now leaping from the deck of the ship into the water. Their forms were distorted and monstrous, a collection of grim mutations. One had the head of a hammerhead shark, another had tentacles for arms. They were closing in. We're gonna die. We're freshmen. We haven't even gotten our hero licenses. I haven't even. Mineta's wail was cut off by a splash of water to his face from one of the approaching thugs. Shut up, brat. The shark-headed villain growled, his voice a guttural rumble. The boss said we just need to keep you busy until All Might shows. But we can have a little fun first. Izuku's mind raced faster than his heart pounded. Analyze. Don't panic. Analyze. His gaze flicked from villain to villain. Sharkhead, obvious strength and aquatic advantage. Tentacle arms, grappling and reach. The others, mostly generic muscle. Their goal is to stall and overpower. They think we're just kids. They're right, but that doesn't mean we're helpless. He felt it then, the familiar hum beneath his skin. One for all. It was a sun caged in his solar plexus, a static charge that prickled at his nerve endings, a promise of impossible power that he could barely touch without shattering himself. All Might's words echoed in his head. You still can't regulate the output. Using it means turning your limbs into ruined flesh, but what choice did he have? He couldn't let them get to Mineta and Ajuri. He had to be a hero. He had to be the one to stand in the way. Ajuri-san, he said, his voice low and urgent. Your quirk is perfect for this environment. Mineta-kun, your spheres float. Can you? They get super sticky when I pull them off. Mineta shrieked, but a spark of understanding flickered in his panicked eyes. They could trap them, right? Izuku affirmed, a sliver of a plan forming. Ajuri-san, you're the most mobile. Can you create a diversion? Draw their attention? Tsuyu gave a single, decisive nod. I can do that. What about you, Midoriya-chan? I'll find an opening, he said, the words feeling hollow even to him. I'll wait until one of them gets close and then I'll use it. One finger. A Delaware smash. Just enough to create a shockwave, to push them back. The risk was immense. A miscalculation could mean a shattered finger, or worse, a crippled hand. But it was the only weapon he had. The villains, tired of waiting, surged forward. Tsuyu acted instantly. With a powerful kick, she launched herself out of the water, her long tongue shooting out to wrap around a pipe on the ship's railing. She swung high, a green blur against the dark metal of the hull, letting out a resonant Kero! To draw their eyes. It worked. Half the villains turned their attention to her, spitting curses and trying to swat her out of the air. Mineta, seeing his chance, started furiously plucking the spheres from his head and flinging them into the water, creating a sticky, impassable minefield between them and the remaining thugs. It's working! Izuku thought, a surge of desperate hope warming him. The hope was short-lived. The shark-headed leader ignored the distractions. His cold, black eyes were locked on Izuku. With a powerful tail flick, he shot through the water like a torpedo. Izuku braced himself, trying to channel One for All into the tip of his right index finger. The power roared, a tempest trying to break free of the dam of his control. It felt like trying to sip from a fire hose. Green sparks, visible even in the murky water, danced around his hand, but the villain was faster. Before Izuku could flick his finger, a massive, rough-skinned hand clamped around his ankle and dragged him under. The world became a muted blue-green hell. Water flooded his nose and mouth, and panic, cold and sharp, stabbed at his chest. The pressure of the villain's grip was immense, threatening to crush the bone. No! I can't! Suddenly, the pressure was gone. He felt a powerful current as something shot past him. Through the distorted water, he saw Tsuyu. She had used her tongue to grab his collar and yank him free, pulling him back toward the surface with surprising strength. They broke the surface together, both of them coughing and gasping. Thanks, Ajuri-san! He choked out. We need to get on the boat. We can't fight them in the water, she stated, ever the pragmatist. Her tongue was already retracting, ready for another move. But the villains were learning. They weren't separating anymore. They swarmed together, a single, menacing unit, cornering them against the rusted hull of the ship. The tentacled villain lashed out, his slimy appendages whipping through the water. Tsuyu dodged one then another, but a third snaked around her waist, lifting her bodily from the water. Tsuyu-chan! Mineta screamed. Gotcha, little froggy! The villain sneered, his grip tightening. Tsuyu grunted, her face contorting in pain. Kero! Everything stopped for Izuku. The worrying analysis in his brain ground to a halt. The strategic thinking, the risk assessment, all of it evaporated in a white-hot flash of pure, protective instinct. His friend was in danger. She was being hurt. And it was his fault. His plan had failed. His weakness had put her in this position. The power of One for All surged, no longer a controlled hum but a raging inferno. It wasn't just in his arm anymore. It felt like it was consuming his entire being, a supernova of inherited will and stockpiled energy. He didn't think about Delaware smashes or Detroit smashes. He didn't think about percentages or broken bones. His entire consciousness focused on a single, overwhelming, all-consuming thought that eclipsed everything else. I have to save her. No. That wasn't it. It was something deeper, something more fundamental to his very soul. He looked at Tsuyu, so capable, so calm, now so helpless in the villain's grasp. He saw her strength, and he saw the villain's crude power mocking it. The thought refined itself, sharpening into a single, desperate point of intent. I don't need to be the one to punch him. She is strong. She just needs more. If only I could give this power to her. It was an impossible, nonsensical desire, a child's wish in the face of a nightmare. But One for All was not a logical quirk. It was a quirk of transference, of will, a torch passed from one soul to another, and Izuku's soul, in that moment, was screaming a single, selfless command. He lunged forward, not at the villain, but toward Tsuyu. His hand reached out, not to strike, but to connect. The villain saw him coming and laughed, assuming he was making a suicidal charge. The tentacled villain holding Tsuyu sneered, tightening his grip in anticipation of crushing her. Midoriya-chan, no! Get back! Tsuyu croaked, her eyes wide with fear for him. His fingers, slick with water, brushed against the damp fabric of her hero costume on her shoulder. It was like flipping a switch to a nuclear reactor. The world didn't explode. It changed. A silent, concussive wave of energy radiated from the point of contact. For Izuku, it was a feeling of profound and terrifying emptiness. The roaring sun inside him wasn't just extinguished. It was ripped out, leaving a gaping, black hole void that sucked all the strength and warmth from his body. The world tilted on its axis. A wave of vertigo and nausea so intense it buckled his knees hit him. The vibrant colors of the USJ seemed to desaturate, and the hum of power that had been his constant companion since meeting All Might vanished, replaced by a deafening, horrifying silence. He felt quirkless. Worse than quirkless. He felt hollowed out, a vessel that had been violently emptied. For Tsuyu, it was the exact opposite. The moment his fingers touched her, it felt like a bolt of lightning had struck her heart. A torrent of raw, untamed energy flooded every cell in her body. It was a roaring, green-tinged inferno that lit up her veins and made her muscles scream, not in pain, but in protest of a power they were never designed to contain. Green sparks, thick and aggressive, erupted from her skin, dancing around her like a swarm of electric fireflies. Her eyes, normally a placid dark green, blazed with an emerald light so bright they seemed to be twin stars. She didn't understand what was happening. It was too much, too fast. Her senses were on fire. She could feel the vibration of Mineta's whimpering in the water 50 feet away. She could smell the rust on the ship's hull. The villain's grip, which seconds ago had felt like crushing steel, now felt like wet paper. What the? The tentacled villain grunted, his eyes wide with shock at the sudden light show. He squeezed harder, trying to snuff out the girl in his grasp. It was a fatal mistake. Tsuyu's reaction was pure instinct. There was no thought, no technique. There was only the primal urge to get this thing off of her. Her tongue, her primary weapon, her most trusted tool, shot out. But it wasn't the fast, flexible appendage he had seen before. This time, it was a cannon. It moved with impossible speed, breaking the sound barrier with a deafening crack that echoed across the dome. The air around it compressed, and the water in its path vaporized. The tongue, glowing with a furious green aura, didn't just strike the villain's chest. It impacted with the force of a speeding truck. There was a sickening crunch of bone and flesh. The villain's eyes went wide, not with pain, but with utter disbelief. He didn't even have time to scream. The force of the blow was absolute. He was launched backwards, a human cannonball, skipping across the water's surface like a stone before slamming into the far wall of the dome with enough force to crack the concrete. He crumpled, unconscious before he even began to fall. The tentacle holding Tsuyu went limp, releasing her. She dropped into the water, landing with a splash that seemed muted and distant compared to the thunderclap her attack had just created. Silence. The other villains in the water had frozen, their jaws agape. The shark-headed leader stared, his predatory confidence completely shattered, replaced by raw, primal fear. He looked from the unconscious form of his comrade to the small, green-haired girl who was now floating in the water, steam rising from her tongue and green lightning still crackling faintly around her. Izuku watched it all from where he was sagging in the water, his body too weak to even tread properly. He saw the impossible power. He saw Tsuyu, terrified and confused. He saw the villain's retreat. His mind, sluggish and foggy, could only form one coherent thought. It worked. I gave it to her. The realization didn't bring pride or relief. It brought a tidal wave of terror. What had he done? The battle for the shipwreck zone was over before it had truly begun. The remaining villains, utterly terrified of the girl who had just one-shot their strongest member, scrambled back onto the ship, choosing to face whatever waited on land rather than the monster in the water. Tsuyu didn't seem to notice. She was staring at her own hands, which trembled uncontrollably. The green sparks were still dancing over her skin, and her entire body ached with a deep, resonant thrum, as if every muscle fiber had been stretched to its breaking point and back. Ajiri-san! Izuku managed to gasp, his voice a hoarse whisper. He was fighting to stay conscious. His limbs felt like they were filled with sand, and a cold sweat slicked his skin. He was vaguely aware of Mineta paddling over to him, his face a mask of awe and terror. Midoriya! What was that? What did you do? And what did Ajiri do? Tsuyu looked at Izuku, her usual stoicism completely gone. Her face was pale, her wide eyes filled with a potent mixture of fear and bewilderment. Midoriya-chan, she said, her voice shaking. My body, it feels like it's going to break. What is this feeling? This power? Before Izuku could attempt to form an answer, the feeling began to change for both of them. For Tsuyu, the roaring inferno in her veins started to recede. It wasn't a sudden cut-off, but a rapid, draining ebb, like a tide going out at impossible speed. The brilliant emerald light in her eyes flickered and died. The green sparks sputtered and vanished. The overwhelming sense of power seeped away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a throbbing, bruised ache in her tongue and jaw. She felt weak, drained, and more tired than she had ever been in her life. The world returned to its normal, muted sensory input. She was just herself again, but a version of herself that felt like it had run 3 marathons back to back. For Izuku, the return was just as jarring as the departure. The terrifying void inside him was suddenly, violently filled. It felt like being force-fed after days of starvation, a painful, overwhelming rush that made him gasp. The hum of One for All returned, settling back into his bones like a long-lost limb being reattached. The world snapped back into sharp, vibrant color. The weakness began to recede, replaced by the familiar, thrumming potential of the quirk. He still felt shaky, dizzy from the whiplash of the experience, but he was no longer hollow. He was whole again. He stared at his hands, then at Tsuyu, whose breathing was ragged. It came back, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The time on the clock was just shy of 5 minutes. 5 minutes of borrowed power. 5 minutes of absolute terror and impossible strength. Midoriya, we gotta get out of the water, Mineta urged, pulling on Izuku's sleeve. More could come back. Tsuyu, shaking off the last of her stupor, nodded. He's right. Karo. We need to regroup. She swam over, her movements a little more sluggish than before, and helped Mineta haul Izuku toward the edge of the water, propping him up against the concrete shore. I don't understand, Tsuyu said, sitting beside him, hugging her knees to her chest. 1 minute I was caught, the next, it was like I was a different person. That power wasn't mine. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. It was yours, wasn't it? That light. It was like what happened when you threw the ball in Aizawa-sensei's class. Izuku opened his mouth to deny it, to lie, to say anything that would deflect. It was the secret he was supposed to carry to his grave. But looking into her honest, frightened eyes, the lie died on his tongue. He could only manage a weak, trembling nod. The ground suddenly shook with a distant, thunderous impact from the central plaza. A new sound echoed through the dome, a booming, confident laugh that cut through the tension like a searchlight through fog. It's All Might! Mineta cried, tears of relief streaming down his face. He's here! We're saved! The sense of relief was palpable, but for Izuku, it was tangled with a new, colder dread. All Might was here. And All Might would have questions. Questions that Izuku had no idea how to answer. The rest of the USJ incident passed in a blur of chaos and relief. All Might's arrival was as decisive as the stories claimed. He moved like a natural disaster, a whirlwind of primary colors and overwhelming force that swept through the remaining villains. The monstrous creature called Nomu gave him trouble, a brutal, bone-shattering fight that left even the symbol of peace bleeding and battered. But in the end, as always, he stood victorious. While the main battle raged, other pros arrived. Cementos, Snipe, and the rest of the UA staff began securing the facility and tending to the students. Izuku, Tsuyu, and Mineta were found by Ectoplasm's clones and escorted back toward the entrance, their part in the fighting over. Izuku remained mostly silent, his mind a maelstrom of confusion. He could feel One for All inside him, humming steadily now, but the memory of that 5-minute void was burned into his psyche. He kept glancing at Tsuyu, who walked with a slight limp, occasionally rubbing her jaw. She met his gaze once, her expression unreadable, before looking away. She wasn't judging him, he didn't think. She was just processing. They all were. When they finally gathered near the entrance with the other safe students, the sight of Aizawa-sensei's broken, bloody form being carried away on a stretcher solidified the grim reality of the day. This hadn't been a drill. This was real. Then he saw him. All Might, standing tall amidst the wreckage, his signature smile firmly in place for the benefit of the other pros and the police. But Izuku could see the truth. He could see the steam rising faintly from his body, the tremor in his clenched fist, the deep exhaustion behind his eyes. He was at his limit. As if sensing his gaze, All Might turned his head. Their eyes met across the plaza. All Might's smile didn't falter, but a question formed in his sharp blue eyes. He gave a subtle nod towards a secluded area behind a large, overturned bus, away from the prying eyes of the police and other students. We need to talk. Izuku's stomach plummeted. He excused himself from the group, mumbling something about needing a moment, and made his way over, his legs feeling unsteady. He rounded the corner of the bus to find All Might already there, leaning against the vehicle. The instant they were out of sight, the heroic form dissolved in a huge cloud of steam, revealing the skeletal, sunken-eyed form of Toshinori Yagi. He coughed, a rack of crimson spattering his hand. Young Midoriya, he rasped, his voice strained. Are you all right? I heard reports you were scattered to the shipwreck zone. Did you have to use it? Izuku flinched. The question was a simple one, but the answer was impossibly complex. He couldn't just say yes or no. He wrung his hands, his gaze fixed on a crack in the pavement. I did, he started, his voice barely a whisper. But not like before. Not on myself. Toshinori's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? Did you manage to regulate the output? A feint? A support move? No, Izuku said, finally forcing himself to look up at his mentor's gaunt face. All Might, something happened. Something impossible. He took a deep, shaky breath and recounted the events in the water. He told him about the villains closing in, about Tsuyu being captured, about the overwhelming, desperate need to empower her rather than fight himself. He described the feeling of reaching out, the strange and terrifying sensation of one for all being siphoned out of him, leaving a cold emptiness in its wake. As he spoke, Toshinori's expression shifted from concern, to confusion, to utter, slack-jawed disbelief. And then she was surrounded by green lightning, just like me. Her tongue struck. All Might, it broke the sound barrier. She sent a villain flying across the entire zone and cracked the wall. She did it with our power. Izuku finished, his voice trembling. And then, after about 5 minutes, it just came back to me. All at once, Toshinori stared at him, his sunken eyes wide and searching, as if trying to find a hint of a lie or a delusion in Izuku's face. He saw only earnest, terrified truth. He was speechless. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He ran a hand through his shaggy blonde hair, a gesture of profound bewilderment. Young Midoriya, that's not possible, he finally said, his voice strained. One for all doesn't do that. It is a stockpiling quirk. It is meant to be held, nurtured, and then passed on. Permanently. It cannot be lent out. But it happened! Izuku insisted, his own panic rising to match his mentor's disbelief. I felt it leave. I was quirkless. I was useless. And she had it. I saw it. My Netakun saw it. Toshinori leaned his head back against the bus, the metal groaning under the slight pressure. He stared up at the shattered glass of the dome, his mind reeling. For 40 years, he had wielded this power. He had accepted it from his master, Nana Shimura, and had made it his own. He knew its rhythms, its costs, its very essence. It was a part of him, a sacred fire he had tended until it was time to pass the torch. The idea that this fire could be temporarily given away, like a borrowed tool, fundamentally broke his entire understanding of the quirk that had defined his life. The previous users, none of them ever spoke of such a thing. Toshinori murmured, his gaze distant. The vestiges within the quirk, they never hinted at it. He looked back at Izuku, his expression now one of grave, world-altering seriousness. When I passed it to you, I gave you my DNA. A permanent transfer. But you were quirkless. You were a perfect, empty vessel. My own quirk, a minor strength enhancer, was already woven into the fabric of One for All when I received it. Every user adds a piece of themselves to the whole. A dawning, terrifying theory began to form in his weary mind. My boy, he said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. Your defining trait, the very reason I chose you, has always been your self-sacrificial heroism. Your first instinct isn't to empower yourself, but to save others, no matter the cost. When I gave you this power, is it possible that your nature, your very soul, has fundamentally altered the quirk's manifestation? Izuku stared at him, the implications of that question crashing down on him. A quirk changed by its user's heart. A power to save that had reshaped itself around his innate desire to help. It was a beautiful, poetic idea. And it was the most terrifying thing he had ever heard. His dream, the one that had fueled him through years of bullying and despair, flashed in his mind, his own silhouette, broad-shouldered and smiling, standing tall like All Might. The symbol of peace. The ultimate hero who could save everyone with a laugh and a punch. But how could he be that symbol if his power wasn't his own to wield? How could he be the pillar of strength if, in the moment of truth, his greatest ability was to make someone else strong while he became a liability? The image in his mind fractured, replaced by the reality he had just lived, cowering, weak, and hollowed out, watching from the sidelines as a friend wielded his power for him. He was not a fighter. He was not a savior. He was a battery. A temporary power-up. An accidental gift. The weight of that unforeseen, unwanted change settled on both of them, a silence heavier than any villain's blow. The age of the symbol of peace was ending, and the nature of what would come next had just become terrifyingly, uncertainly, new. A week. It had been 7 days since the nightmare at the USJ, and UA High School was a fortress. Pro-heroes patrolled the perimeter, their expressions grim and watchful. The school gates, once a symbol of hopeful aspiration, were now a heavily reinforced choke point manned by security personnel who checked IDs with a cold, robotic efficiency. The atmosphere within the hallowed halls had shifted from one of boisterous ambition to a quiet, nervous tension. Students walked in tight, hushed groups, conversations punctuated by anxious glances over their shoulders. The attack had shattered their youthful invincibility, replacing it with the sobering reality of the world they were training to enter. For Izuku Midoriya, the tension was a physical presence, a heavy cloak he couldn't shrug off. He felt the stares of his classmates, a mixture of concern, curiosity, and a sliver of awe he felt he hadn't earned. The story of the shipwreck zone had circulated, a distorted legend passed in whispers. They said the frog girl, Tsuyu Ajiri, had manifested some kind of incredible power to save them. They said Midoriya had been brave. No one knew the truth, and the weight of that secret was crushing him. He'd barely spoken to Tsuyu. They'd exchanged a few strained, polite greetings, but a chasm now existed between them. It was a gulf carved by a power she hadn't asked for and a secret he couldn't share. He saw her in the cafeteria, rubbing her jaw absently. He saw her in the locker room, stretching her tongue with a wince. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had hurt her. The power was too much. Her body hadn't been ready. He had been reckless, desperate, and his friend had paid a physical price for his strange, new ability. The text message had come late last night, from a burner phone he knew belonged to All Might. Principal Nisa's office. Tomorrow, after classes. Do not be late. Do not be seen. And so, he found himself walking down a corridor he'd never seen before, a pristine, white-walled wing of the main building that hummed with a low, electronic thrum. The air here was sterile, lacking the familiar scent of chalk dust and youthful energy. This was the administrative heart of UA, the school's brain. Nisa's office was at the very end of the hall. The door was a simple, dark wood, but Izuku felt as if it were the gate to his own trial. He knocked, his knuckles rapping softly against the polished surface. "Come in!" A cheerful, high-pitched voice called out. Izuku pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was both exactly what he expected and nothing like it. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the vast UA campus. Another was covered in a dizzying array of monitors, displaying security camera feeds, data streams, and complex schematics. The furniture, however, was classic and elegant: plush leather chairs, a mahogany desk polished to a mirror shine, and a delicate porcelain tea set from which steam was currently rising. And sitting behind the desk, looking impossibly small in a chair designed for a human, was Principal Nisa. The creature, mouse, dog, or bear, no one was quite sure, beamed at him, his black eyes glinting with an unnerving intelligence. In a chair to the side, looking gaunt and exhausted, was Toshinori Yagi. "Ah, Midoriya-kun! Punctual, as expected. Please, have a seat," Nisa chirped, gesturing with a paw to the empty chair opposite his desk. "Tea? It's a first flush gyokuro. Excellent for stimulating the synapses." "And no, thank you, sir," Izuku stammered, sinking into the surprisingly comfortable leather chair. He felt like a mouse being invited to a discussion with two very different, very dangerous cats. Very well, Nisa said, taking a delicate sip from his own tiny cup. He set it down with a soft click. His cheerful demeanor evaporated, replaced by an intensity that made the room feel several degrees colder. Let us not waste time with pleasantries. We are here to discuss the anomalous manifestation of your quirk, one for all, during the USJ incident. Toshinori coughed, a dry, rasping sound. Young Midoriya has already given me his account, Principal. I have shared my theories with you. Indeed you have, All Might, Nisa said, his gaze fixed on Izuku. And I must confess, it is the most fascinating quirk development I have encountered in my entire career. Izuku flinched at the word fascinating. It felt clinical, detached from the terror he had experienced. I have reviewed the limited security footage from the shipwreck zone. Nisa continued, one of the monitors on the wall flickering to life. It showed a grainy, top-down view of the water. The audio is poor, and the visuals are obscured, but the energy signature is undeniable. We registered a massive, instantaneous spike originating from Azuri Tsuyu's position, a spike that matches, almost perfectly, the energy signature you produced during Aizawa-kun's quirk apprehension test. The screen split, showing Tsuyu's glowing form next to a still image of Izuku from his first day, his arm radiating the same green lightning. The evidence was stark, undeniable. Azuri-kun's testimony was illuminating. Nisa went on. She described a sudden, overwhelming influx of power simultaneous to your physical contact. A power she felt she could not control, which reacted instinctively. She also described a profound physical backlash. Muscle strain, micro tears in her lingual tissue, and severe fatigue. Consistent with a body unprepared for such an output, Izuku's stomach churned. He had done that to her. He had hurt his friend. Toshinori's theory, Nisa said, steepling his small paws, is that the nature of the quirk itself has been altered by its host, that you, Midoriya-kun, as a previously quirkless individual with an unusually potent, one might even say pathological, self-sacrificial drive, have unconsciously reshaped the parameters of One for All. You have turned a quirk of personal stockpiling into one of temporary transference. He leaned forward, his black eyes boring into Izuku. I believe this theory is not only plausible, but highly probable. Quirks, especially those with a deep, sentient history like One for All, are not merely biological mechanisms. They are tied to the psyche of the wielder. You did not wish to be stronger in that moment. You wished for your ally to be stronger. The quirk, in its first true moment of crisis under your command, obliged. Izuku could only stare, speechless. Hearing the theory laid out so clinically by a certified genius made it terrifyingly real. The strategic implications are staggering, Nisa murmured, a flicker of what looked like genuine excitement in his eyes. A hero who can, at will, grant the power of a top-tier pro to any ally they choose. It's unprecedented. It's not just a quirk, it's a force multiplier. Imagine a rescue operation where a hero with a digging quirk is suddenly granted the power to tunnel through a collapsed building in seconds. Imagine a defensive hero suddenly able to create a shield capable of withstanding any attack. The potential to turn the tide of any engagement, to overcome any obstacle by empowering the right person at the right time. It's a paradigm shift in heroics. Nisa's words painted a grand, strategic picture, but all Izuku could feel was the memory of the void. The hollowing out. The helplessness. But what about me? The words escaped his lips before he could stop them, small and fragile in the imposing office. While it's lent out, I'm empty. I can't move. I'm just a target. Nisa's expression softened slightly. A valid and critical concern. The vulnerability of the user, the commander, as it were, becomes the single greatest liability. A commander who falls means the entire army loses its ultimate weapon. This is a weakness that must be mitigated. Toshinori finally spoke, his voice heavy with a fatherly concern that contrasted sharply with Nisa's analytical zeal. This is a heavy burden, young Midoriya. Far heavier than the one I had to bear. My burden was to be the strongest. Yours is to decide who is. The weight of those words settled on Izuku's shoulders. The responsibility was immense. The choice of who to empower, the guilt if they got hurt, the risk to himself. It was a crushing load. "We need more data," Niza declared, his tone shifting back to business. "The USJ incident was a chaotic, uncontrolled event. We need a controlled test. We need to understand the parameters, the exact duration, the physical and mental toll on both you and the recipient. We need to know if the recipient can consciously regulate the output, unlike Ajri-kun." Izuku's blood ran cold. An experiment. He was the subject. "We have already selected a viable candidate for the first controlled trial," Niza said, looking at Toshinori, who gave a slow, reluctant nod. "A student known for his discipline, his physical conditioning, and his unwavering adherence to rules and procedure. Someone who will not panic when faced with overwhelming power, but will instead attempt to analyze and control it." Izuku knew instantly who they meant. "Ida-kun," he breathed. "Precisely," Niza confirmed. "We will arrange a private session at one of the auxiliary training grounds. Recovery Girl will be on standby. This is of the utmost importance, Midoriya-kun. We are navigating uncharted territory. Your journey to becoming a hero has taken a detour none of us could have ever predicted." The meeting concluded shortly after. Niza outlined the protocols for the test, his voice a cheerful staccato of safety measures and data-gathering objectives. Izuku nodded numbly, his mind still reeling. As he left the office, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind him, he felt more like a piece of high-stakes equipment than a hero in training. Toshinori followed him out, his long strides easily keeping pace with Izuku's shell-shocked shuffle. They walked in silence for a time, the only sound their footsteps echoing in the empty white corridor. "I know this is a lot to process, my boy," Toshinori said gently, his voice losing the formal edge it had in Niza's presence. They came to a stop by a large window, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the polished floor. Izuku stared out at the campus, at students heading back to their dorms, laughing and talking, their lives seemingly so simple, so straightforward. His own path, once a straight line aimed at a single, shining goal, had just twisted into an unrecognizable knot. He couldn't hold it in anymore. The fear, the confusion, the bitter disappointment, it all came pouring out. "A force multiplier?" he said, his voice cracking with emotion. He turned to face his mentor, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "A commander? All Might, that's not what I want to be. I wanted to be you." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and desperate. "I wanted to be the one who saves people with a smile. The one who stands in the way, who takes the punches, who can look at a villain and say I am here, and have that mean something. But I can't do that, can I? The moment I use my quirk to help someone, I become the weakest person on the battlefield. I'm not a hero. I'm hero equipment. I'm a battery pack, a walking, talking support item that someone else uses to be great." His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. The shame was a burning coal in his gut. "What am I supposed to do? Hide behind a rock and tell people like Uraraka or Ida to fight for me? To risk their bodies with a power that could break them, just like it almost broke me? Just like it hurt Ajri-san? That's not being a hero. That's being a coward." The dream he'd cherished his entire life was crumbling to dust. He wasn't the next symbol of peace. He was just the kid who held the power for the real heroes. Toshinori listened to his entire tirade, his expression pained and empathetic. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He let Izuku's grief and anger fill the space, acknowledging its validity. When Izuku finally fell silent, breathing heavily, his shoulders slumped in defeat, Toshinori placed a thin, bony hand on his shoulder. "I understand," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I understand your disappointment. Your dream was a noble one, forged from a good heart, and it is a bitter pill to swallow when the path you envisioned for yourself is washed away." He sighed, his gaze turning to the window. "When I was your age, all I wanted was to create a world where people could smile and feel safe. Nana, my master, she told me that the world needed a pillar, a symbol so strong and unwavering that his very presence would deter evil. So I became that pillar. I focused all of my energy, all of One for All, into myself. I became the strongest, but in doing so, I also became alone." He looked back at Izuku, his sunken eyes holding a profound sadness. I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders, my boy. And now, look at me. I am broken. The pillar is crumbling. My way of doing things, it has a definitive, painful end. His grip on Izuku's shoulder tightened slightly. Perhaps the quirk knew this. Perhaps it understands that the era of a single, solitary pillar is over. Perhaps the world doesn't need another All Might. It needs something new. A hero who doesn't hoard power for himself, but shares it. A hero whose greatest strength isn't in his own fists, but in the trust he places in others. But I'm weak, Izuku whispered, the word tasting like ash. Are you? Toshinori countered softly. It takes no strength to throw a punch when you are the strongest man in the room, but to stand on a battlefield, vulnerable and without power, and place your absolute faith, and your most powerful weapon, in the hands of a comrade? Izuku, that is not weakness. That is a different kind of strength entirely. It is the strength of a leader. It is the strength of trust. And it may be a strength that is even more powerful than mine ever was. Toshinori's words didn't magically erase Izuku's despair, but they did plant a tiny, fragile seed of a different perspective in the barren soil of his disappointment. It wasn't a solution, but it was a glimmer of a different path, one he hadn't considered. We will do the test with young Ida, Toshinori said, his tone firming with resolve. We will gather the data. We will be safe. And we will walk this new path together. You are not alone in this, young Midoriya. I am here. Izuku looked up at his mentor, at the unwavering resolve in his eyes, and gave a slow, hesitant nod. He was still terrified. He was still heartbroken over his shattered dream, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of something else, the daunting, terrifying weight of a new and profound responsibility. 2 days later, Izuku stood on the edge of Training Ground Gamma, a vast indoor facility colloquially known as the Industrial Zone. The landscape was a chaotic jumble of concrete pillars, steel girders, and massive pipes, designed to simulate complex urban environments. The air smelled of cold metal and dust. He was not alone. Toshinori stood beside him, in his skeletal form, a stopwatch in one hand and a communications earpiece in the other. Across the facility, Recovery Girl was seated in a mobile medical station, her expression stern and watchful. And in the center of the training ground, stretching with a focused intensity, was Tenya Ida. Ida had accepted the request with the solemn gravity of a knight being entrusted with a sacred quest. Toshinori had given him a carefully curated version of the truth, that Midoriya's quirk had a unique property they needed to test for support applications, and Ida's discipline made him the ideal candidate. Ida, ever the model student, had simply nodded and declared, I will do my utmost to assist in this important research for the betterment of heroics. Now, standing in his hero costume, Ida looked like a medieval knight reimagined for the space age. He radiated a focused, controlled energy. Are you ready, young Ida? Toshinori's voice crackled through Izuku's earpiece. Affirmative, all might. Ida's voice boomed back, crisp and clear. And you, young Midoriya? Izuku took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. I'm ready, all right, Toshinori said. The objective is simple. Young Midoriya, you will transfer the quirk. Young Ida, you will not attempt any offensive maneuvers. Your only goal is to feel the power, to try and control it. We want you to attempt to channel a low, consistent percentage. 5% if you can manage it. Just hold it. We need a baseline. Izuku walked out to the center of the floor, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He met Ida's gaze. Ida-kun, Izuku said, his voice lower than he intended. Thank you for doing this. It is my duty as class president and as your friend to help, Midoriya-kun. Ida responded, his expression serious. I will not let you down. It's going to feel like a lot. Izuku warned, remembering Tsuyu's pained expression. Don't try to fight it. Just guide it. Ida gave a sharp, decisive nod. Izuku reached out a hand, his palm open. Ida mirrored the gesture, placing his hand against Izuku's. The contact was firm, professional. Izuku closed his eyes. He didn't focus on an enemy this time. He focused on Ida. He focused on his friend's discipline, his strength, his controlled nature. He willed the power to flow, not in a desperate, chaotic burst, but as a steady, intentional current. Trust him. The transfer was just as jarring as before. The world-ripping sensation of being hollowed out, the sudden vertigo, the draining of all strength. But this time, he was prepared for it. He staggered back, his knees buckling, and forced himself to sit down on the cold concrete floor, leaning on his hands to keep from collapsing completely. The vibrant colors of the training ground faded to a dull gray. The hum of One for All was gone, replaced by that terrifying, internal silence. He felt fragile, exposed, and utterly weak. For Ida, the experience was electric. A tsunami of raw, untamed energy slammed into him. It was a physical force, a roaring green inferno that threatened to consume him whole. His armor-plated hero costume felt like tissue paper against the storm raging within him. Green lightning, far more potent and wild than Izuku's had ever been, erupted from his body, crackling and snapping in the air around him. The pipes in his calves, the vents for his engine quirk, began to glow with a furious emerald light. GHHH! Ida grunted, his whole body seizing up. His muscles screamed under the sudden, impossible strain. This was nothing like his own quirk, which was a familiar, well-oiled machine. This was like being strapped to the front of a rocket. Young Ida, report! Tashinori's voice was tense. Are you alright? The power, it is immense! Ida ground out, his teeth clenched. It resists control. It demands release. From his seated position, Izuku watched, his own weakness forgotten in a surge of anxiety for his friend. He saw Ida's struggle, the way his powerful frame trembled under the strain. He was fighting it too hard. Ida-kun! Izuku called out, his voice weak but clear. Don't fight it! You're trying to build a dam against a flood. You need to dig a channel. Guide it. Just a little bit. Feel it in your legs, where your own quirk is. Ida's eyes, blazing with green light, snapped to Izuku. He took a shuddering breath, his disciplined mind latching onto the instruction. A channel, not a dam. He stopped trying to suppress the power and instead tried to consciously direct a trickle of it downward, into his calves, merging it with the familiar thrum of his engine. It was like adding rocket fuel to a sports car engine. He tried for 5%, but the power was too wild. He managed to wrangle what felt like 15%. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The emerald glow around his calves intensified, and the air around his legs began to shimmer with heat. Without meaning to, he took a single step. Boom! The sound was not a footstep. It was a sonic boom that echoed off the walls and shook the entire facility. The concrete floor where his foot had landed spiderwebbed with cracks. He hadn't run. He had simply moved, and in doing so, had teleported 10 meters to the left, leaving a shimmering afterimage in his place. Ida stared at his new position, his eyes wide with shock. He hadn't even activated his quirk's recipro burst. That was just a single, OFA-enhanced step. Incredible! Tashinori breathed into the comms. Ida-kun, try to run. Izuku urged, a spark of Nizu's strategic fascination igniting within him despite his own vulnerability. A straight line, to the far wall and back. Ida nodded, steeling himself. He crouched, feeding that 15% into his engines. He activated them. The world vanished. There was no sense of acceleration, only a violent displacement. One instant, he was in the center of the gym. The next, he was at the far wall, the impact of his stop sending shockwaves through the reinforced structure. He turned and pushed off again. A second sonic boom rattled Izuku's teeth. Ida was back at his starting point before the echo of the first boom had even faded. He stood there, panting, steam pouring from his calf engines. The ground beneath his feet was scorched. He had covered over 200 meters in less than a second. It was a speed that defied physics, a speed that would make even All Might in his prime take notice. The synergy! Ida panted, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. My engine provides the vector. This power provides an impossible magnitude of thrust. It is the ultimate accelerator. The test was a resounding success. A terrifying, paradigm-shattering success. As the 5-minute mark approached, Ida powered down, his body slumping with exhaustion. A moment later, Izuku felt the rush of One for All returning, flooding the void and bringing strength and color back to his world. He gasped, the sensation still painfully jarring. He got to his feet, shaky but whole again, and watched as Ida was checked over by recovery girl. He was exhausted, his muscles were aching, but he was otherwise unharmed. His disciplined body and mind had withstood the strain. The test had proven Nizu's theory. It had showcased an incredible new potential. But as Izuku looked at the cracked concrete floor and the scorched marks left by Ida's run, a profound sense of alienation washed over him. He hadn't done that. He hadn't created that impossible speed. He had just been a spectator to his own power's glory, sitting helpless on the floor while his friend became a living thunderclap. The success felt hollow, reinforcing his deepest fear. He wasn't the hero. He was just the source. He was so lost in his own conflicted thoughts that he didn't notice the figure watching from the shadowed archway of a side entrance. Katsuki Bakugo had been drawn by the noise. He'd been in a nearby training area, blasting robots into scrap metal with a furious intensity, trying to work off the lingering frustration of the USJ. Then he'd heard the sonic booms. Not the crackle of his explosions, but the clean, sharp crack of broken sound barriers. It was a sound he associated with only one person, All Might. He'd followed the sound, slipping into Gym Gamma unnoticed. He'd seen the whole thing. He saw Deku, the useless, quirkless pebble from his past, sitting on the ground looking pale and pathetic. And he saw Four Eyes Ida, moving with a speed that was utterly monstrous, wreathed in the same green lightning that Deku had inexplicably produced. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. The ball throw. The USJ. And now this. The secret of Deku's borrowed power wasn't a secret anymore, not to him, and the reality of it filled him with a white-hot, contemptuous rage. He waited. He watched Ida and All Might's skeletal form talk animatedly. He watched Recovery Girl fuss over them, and he waited until Deku, looking troubled and alone, split off from the group and began the long walk back to the locker rooms. Bakugo moved, intercepting him in an empty, echoing hallway. He slammed a hand against the wall, blocking Deku's path. The crackle of a small explosion by Deku's ear made him jump back with a yelp. "K Kakken! Don't you Kakken me, you damn nerd!" Bakugo snarled, his red eyes burning with a furious fire. He loomed over Izuku, his expression a mask of pure scorn. "I saw you! In there, sitting on your ass while Four Eyes did all the work." Izuku's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me!" Bakugo roared, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. "I'm not an idiot. That green lightning shit, that's you. That's the quirk you've been hiding. And I finally get it." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous, mocking whisper. "So that's your power? You can't even use it yourself, can you? You're so damn weak, so pathetic, that your only trick is to make somebody else strong for a few minutes." Every word was a perfectly aimed dagger, striking deep into Izuku's most raw and painful insecurities. "You haven't changed at all," Bakugo sneered, a cruel, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. "You're still the same useless Deku you've always been, just with a flashy gimmick. You think that makes you a hero? Hiding behind other people? Letting them take the risks while you watch? You're not a hero. You're a cheerleader." He pushed off the wall, shoving past Izuku and bumping his shoulder hard. "Stay out of my way." Bakugo spat, not even bothering to look back. "I'm going to be the #1 hero with my own damn strength. I don't need any shitty, hand-me-down power from a weakling like you." He stalked off down the hallway, leaving Izuku standing alone, trembling. Bakugo's venomous words echoed in the silence, a perfect, brutal reflection of the fears that were already consuming him from the inside. The approval of Nizu, the guidance of All Might, it all faded away, drowned out by the scorn of his rival. Bakugo had seen the truth, and his judgment was absolute. Izuku's burden wasn't just strategic or physical. It was a crisis of his very identity, a gaping wound in his soul that his oldest tormentor had just ripped wide open. The days that followed the test with Ida were a special kind of hell for Izuku Midoriya. Bakugo's words had burrowed deep into his psyche, a venomous parasite feeding on his already burgeoning self-doubt. Cheerleader. Hiding behind other people. Useless. The taunts played on a loop in his head, a soundtrack to his every waking moment. He'd walk the halls of UA, and every glance from a classmate felt like a judgment. Did they see him as a hero in training, or as the weak link? Did they know that the power he held was one he couldn't even wield for himself? The crisis of identity was no longer a philosophical debate in Nisa's office. It was a heavy, suffocating shroud. He would lie awake at night in his dorm room, staring at his All Might poster. The iconic, smiling face that had been his lifelong source of inspiration now felt like a cruel mockery. The poster represented everything he had yearned to be, a singular, indomitable force for good. A pillar, but his own reality was shaping up to be the complete opposite. He wasn't the pillar, he was the mortar, the unseen substance that held the stronger bricks together. It was a noble purpose, Toshinori had said, but it felt hollow. It felt like a consolation prize for a dream he had been forced to abandon. During combat training, the feeling of uselessness was magnified 100-fold. Aizawa-sensei would pair them off for sparring matches, and Izuku would be forced to rely on the rudimentary hand-to-hand skills All Might had been teaching him. He was agile, and his analytical mind allowed him to predict movements and spot weaknesses, but without one for all to back him up, he was hopelessly outmatched. He'd be easily thrown by Uraraka's martial arts, frozen by Todoroki's ice, or blasted back by Bakugo's explosions. He couldn't risk lending his quirk during these simple exercises. The potential for injury was too high, and the secret too fragile. So he held it inside him, a caged sun that offered him no warmth, and he lost. Again and again. Each defeat was another turn of the knife. Bakugo's sneers grew more frequent and more cutting. "See? Without your little power-up trick, you're nothing, Deku!" He'd roar across the training ground, ensuring everyone could hear. And Izuku would just have to take it, his face burning with a shame that was so profound it felt like a physical illness. One particularly grueling afternoon, after being effortlessly subdued by Ojiro's tail in a grappling exercise, Izuku sat on a bench in the locker room, nursing a bruised ego and a throbbing shoulder. He was the last one there, the scent of sweat and antiseptic soap hanging heavy in the air. He stared at his reflection in the polished steel of a locker door. He saw a boy with wide, frightened eyes, a boy completely out of his depth. "You can't keep trying to be a frontline fighter," a voice in his head said, sharp and analytical. It was the part of his brain that scribbled in his notebooks, the part that saw patterns and strategies where others saw chaos. "Your current approach is illogical. You are attempting to fit a square peg into a round hole. You are trying to be a hammer when you have been designed as a blueprint." The thought struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had been so fixated on his lost dream, on the hero he wanted to be, that he had completely failed to consider the hero he could be. He had been mourning the death of one path instead of looking for the start of another. If he was a liability on the front lines while his quirk was in use, then he shouldn't be on the front lines. If his primary weapon was his mind, his ability to analyze, to strategize, to see the synergy between quirks, then he needed to build his entire fighting style around that. He couldn't be the sword, but he could be the hand that guided it. A new kind of energy surged through him, not the crackling green power of One for All, but a frantic, intellectual fire. He scrambled for his backpack, pulling out his well-worn Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. He flipped past the detailed entries on established prose and turned to a fresh, empty page. At the top he wrote a new title, DKU, Hero Analysis Commander Style. His pen began to fly across the page, his writing growing more fevered and intense with each new idea. Problem: extreme vulnerability when OFA is transferred. User is quirkless, physically drained, and a primary target. Solution: do not engage in direct combat. Relocate to a position of tactical oversight. High ground. Secured locations. Required gear. 1. Mobility. Cannot rely on OFA for movement. Need non-quirk-based vertical and horizontal traversal. Grappling lines? Similar to Aizawa-sensei's capture weapon but for personal transport. Propulsion system? Maybe too complex. Grapple hooks integrated into gloves and boots seem most efficient. 2. Analysis. My eyes and brain are my main weapons. Need to enhance them. A visor. Not just for protection. Needs high-resolution zoom. Thermal imaging to track hidden opponents. Quirk energy signature analysis. Is that even possible? Need to research. 3. Communication. If I am to be a commander, I need to communicate with my unit. Must be instantaneous, secure, and multi-channel. A comm suite built into my cowl, able to speak to the whole team, or to individual members silently. 4. Defense/support. Cannot be entirely helpless. Need non-lethal defensive options. Capture foam deployers, like the ones used by pro heroes Slide and Go. Caltrops for area denial. Smoke grenades for repositioning. A utility belt. I need a utility belt. He sketched designs, his hand a blur. A new cowl with a wraparound visor and built-in comms relay. Armored gloves with reinforced knuckles and hidden grapple launchers. A belt lined with canisters and pouches. His hero costume, once a loving tribute to All Might, was transforming on the page into something entirely new. It was less about inspiration and more about pure, pragmatic function. It was the field gear of a battlefield general, not a brawling symbol of peace. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. It was a complete surrender of his old dream, an admission that he could never be like All Might. But it was also the first time in weeks that he felt a spark of hope, a sense of agency. If he couldn't be the hero he wanted to be, he would forge himself into the hero he needed to be. The next day, Izuku didn't head to the usual training grounds after class. He took a deep breath, clutched the straps of his backpack which now contained his sketchbook of new designs, and made his way to a part of the UA campus that was legendary for its chaos, the support department. The entrance to the main development studio was a set of massive, blast-proof steel doors, currently scorched black in several places and dented inward. A loud, rhythmic clang, 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 echoed from within, punctuated by the occasional high-pitched whine of machinery and a sudden, muffled explosion that made the doors rattle in their frame. Izuku hesitated, his hand hovering over the access panel. This was the domain of geniuses and mad scientists. It was the domain of Mei Hatsum. He took another breath and pushed the doors open. The sensory assault was immediate. The air was thick with the smell of hot metal, ozone, and something vaguely like burned sugar. The noise was a symphony of destruction and creation, hammers striking anvils, plasma torches hissing, engines revving and stalling. The studio itself was a vast, cathedral-like cavern, cluttered with half-finished projects, piles of scrap metal, blueprints pinned to every available surface, and wires snaking across the floor like metallic ivy. It was a paradise of pure, unadulterated invention, and in the center of it all, like the queen of this chaotic kingdom, was Mei Hatsum. She was wearing oil-stained overalls over her uniform, a pair of welding goggles perched on her forehead, and a manic grin on her face. She was currently perched precariously atop a large, vaguely humanoid machine, tightening a bolt with a comically oversized wrench. "Just a little more torque for my supermobile chassis, baby!" she yelled to no one in particular. And done! She leaped down from the machine, landing in a crouch. Her specialized zoom lenses for eyes swiveled and focused on Izuku, who was standing awkwardly by the entrance. "Well, hello there," she chirped, her voice loud enough to be heard over the din. "It's you! From the sports festival! The one who made it to the final round without a flashy quirk. What can I do for you? Need some upgrades for your costume? I can make your boots rocket-powered. Or maybe some impact-absorbing gloves? I have a new polymer gel that can stop a truck. My babies are top of the line." She was a whirlwind of frantic energy, already pulling out blueprints and holding them up to his face. Izuku, flustered, took a step back. Why yes, Hatsum-san," he stammered, holding up his own sketchbook as a shield. "I do need some support items. But it's not for what you think." Mei paused, her head tilting. Her zoom lenses clicked as they focused on his notebook. "Oh? A fellow inventor? Let me see, let me see!" Before he could protest, she snatched the notebook from his hands, her eyes scanning his frantic sketches with an intensity that was almost frightening. She flipped through the pages, her initial manic grin slowly morphing into a look of genuine, focused interest. She stopped on his designs for the new cowl and visor. Multi-channel comms linked to an encrypted short-wave transmitter. Visor with variable zoom, thermal, and is this a theoretical model for tracking quirk energy signatures? She murmured, her voice losing its boisterous edge. This is ambitious. The processing power required for real-time energy analysis would be immense. She flipped to the page with the grapple gear. Wrist and boot-mounted grapple lines with magnetic latching and variable speed retraction motors. Lightweight, high-tensile strength carbon fiber wiring. You've even calculated the required torque to lift a 70 kilograms payload. She looked up from the notebook, her usual crazed excitement replaced by a look of sharp, professional respect. This isn't just an upgrade request, she said, her zoom lenses fixed on him. This is a total system overhaul. You're changing your entire operational style. You're moving from close-quarters combat to tactical command and control. Izuku was stunned. She had understood his intent instantly, grasping the core concept behind his desperate scribbles in a matter of seconds. Why yes, he said, finding his voice. That's exactly it. My quirk, it has a very specific, very dangerous drawback. It makes me a liability in a direct fight. So I can't be a direct fighter anymore. I need to become a commander. I need gear that lets me see the whole battlefield, talk to my team, and move without relying on my own power. A slow, wide grin spread across May's face. It was different from her usual one. This wasn't the grin of a mad inventor eager to show off her babies. This was the grin of an engineer who had just been presented with the most interesting challenge of her life. I love it, she declared, her eyes sparkling with inspiration. A hero who fights with his brain and my babies. It's a perfect partnership. The challenge. The innovation. We'll need to build a custom power source for the visor, something compact but with high output. And the grapple motors need to be whisper quiet for stealth repositioning. And the capture foam. I have a new formula, super adhesive but dissolves in 20 minutes. Oh, this is going to be my masterpiece. She grabbed his hand and started dragging him deeper into her workshop. Come on, pretty boy. We've got work to do. Let's forge a commander. Izuku, dragged along in her wake, couldn't help but smile. For the first time, someone had looked at his new path not with pity or scorn, but with genuine, unadulterated excitement. In the chaotic, grease-stained heart of the development studio, his broken dream didn't matter. All that mattered was the project. All that mattered was building the future. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Every moment Izuku wasn't in class or doing homework, he was in the development studio with May. He learned to navigate her organized chaos, to speak her language of alloys and processors, and to duck when a baby inevitably misfired and exploded. They worked relentlessly. Izuku's analytical mind and May's inventive genius proved to be a potent combination. He would describe a tactical problem, and she would engineer a brilliant, often explosive, solution. I need to be able to tag my allies on my visor's HUD, Izuku explained one afternoon, pointing to a schematic. So I can monitor their vitals and their position in real time. Easy. May chirped, already rummaging through a bin of electronics. We'll make tiny, adhesive transponders. They sync with your comms unit via a proprietary low-energy frequency. We can embed them in their costumes. My babies will always know where their friends are. The process was transformative for Izuku. It forced him to think about hero work in a completely new way. It wasn't about how to throw the strongest punch anymore. It was about sight lines, communication lag, retreat paths, and resource management. He was learning the art of war, not just the art of the brawl. But building the gear was only half the battle. A commander is useless without a unit that trusts him. He knew he couldn't keep his secret from his closest friends forever, not if he expected them to work with him. He approached Uraraka and Ida first, finding them in the common room of the dorms. His heart pounded as he asked them to meet him at one of the smaller, private training grounds. He laid it all out for them. He told them about inheriting the quirk from All Might, about its immense power, and about the terrible, shattering drawback of using it himself. And then he told them about its new, bizarre manifestation, the ability to lend it out. Ida listened with a solemn intensity, his hand subconsciously going to the CAF engines he now knew could achieve impossible speeds. Uraraka's expression was one of wide-eyed shock, which slowly melted into a deep, profound empathy. Deku-kun, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "So all this time, every time you used it and broke your bones, I was trying to be something I wasn't," Izuku finished, his gaze on the floor. "And at the USJ, when I gave the power to Azuri-san, it was an accident. But it showed me the truth. My role is different." He finally looked up, meeting their eyes. "I can't ask you to do this. The power is dangerous. It could hurt you. But if we're going to be a team, a real team, I need you to know, and I need to know if I can trust you with it." Ida adjusted his glasses, his expression stern but unwavering. "Midoriya-kun, the trust you have already shown us by revealing this secret is immense. Your burden is great, but you do not have to carry it alone. If my body can serve as a vessel for that power to save others, under your strategic guidance, then I will gladly accept that role. It is a logical and efficient distribution of assets." Uraraka's response was simpler, but no less powerful. She stepped forward and placed a hand on his arm. "Of course, Deku-kun," she said, her brown eyes shining with determination. "We're your friends. We trust you. Always." Relief washed over Izuku so intensely it almost buckled his knees. He wasn't alone, so their own training began. It was a slow, painstaking process. They would book a private gym, with recovery girl on standby, and they would practice. Izuku, now equipped with the prototype of his new visor and comms unit, would lend OFA to one of them and coach them from the sidelines. "Uraraka-san, breathe!" he'd call out, his voice calm and steady in her earpiece. "Don't let it overwhelm you. Focus on your fingertips. Try to channel just a small amount, maybe 8%, and combine it with your zero gravity." Uraraka, floating in the center of the gym with green sparks dancing around her, would take a ragged breath. She'd tap a heavy training weight, and instead of just floating, it would rocket toward the ceiling with enough force to dent the reinforced plating. "Too much!" she'd yelp. "It's okay. Try again. Feel the flow. It's like pouring water, not opening a fire hydrant." He used his notebooks, his analytical mind breaking down every detail. He theorized how OFA would synergize with their own quirks. For Ida, it was a pure speed amplifier. For Uraraka, it could turn her zero gravity from a floating effect into a powerful telekinetic push or pull. He even brought Tsuyu into a session, after a long, awkward but heartfelt apology for what happened at the USJ. Tsuyu, ever the pragmatist, accepted his apology with a simple, "Karo." It was a scary situation. We all did what we had to. She was more hesitant to accept the power again, but with Izuku's careful guidance, she learned to channel a small percentage, turning her tongue from a simple grappling tool into a high-tensile whip capable of shattering concrete blocks. They became his core unit. Ida the spear tip, Uraraka the forceful support, and Tsuyu the versatile recon. He was their commander. He learned their limits, their strengths, and how the power felt in each of them. He learned to manage the 5-minute timer, coordinating transfers and cooldowns. He learned to watch the battlefield through his new visor, calling out threats and directing their movements, his own vulnerability a constant, sharp reminder of the stakes. He was being forged, not in the fires of combat, but in the crucible of trust and strategy. He was letting go of the dream of being the next All Might and slowly, painfully, embracing the reality of becoming the first Deku. He was no longer just a boy with a borrowed quirk. He was a commander learning to wield his true weapon, his team. The burden was still there, a heavy weight on his soul, but for the first time, he felt strong enough to carry it. The end-of-term internships were supposed to be a chance to experience the day-to-day reality of pro-hero work. For most of Class 1A, it was a week of patrols, paperwork, and the occasional low-level purse snatching. For Izuku Midoriya, it was an opportunity. He'd meticulously chosen his internship with the retired pro, Gran Torino. The diminutive, jet-propelled hero was one of the few people on the planet who knew the secret of One for All, and Izuku had hoped the old man's legendary teaching methods could help him understand the core of the quirk he now wielded in such a bizarre fashion. The training was as brutal and eccentric as the rumors suggested. Gran Torino didn't care about Izuku's new, commander style. He cared about the fundamental power. He spent days bouncing off the walls of his cluttered apartment, whacking Izuku from unpredictable angles, forcing him to learn how to keep a low-level current of 1 for all flowing through his entire body constantly, not just in explosive bursts. It was a revelation, this. Full cowl, as he began to call it, allowed him to move with enhanced speed and agility even without lending the quirk away. It was only 5%, a pale imitation of the full power, but it made him feel less like a fragile, quirkless liability and more like a capable hero in his own right. But a shadow hung over the entire week. A dark, insidious thread that pulled at the corner of Izuku's mind. Hosa City. The news was saturated with it. Reports of a self-proclaimed purger, of false heroes, a villain who targeted pros he deemed unworthy, leaving them crippled but alive. The hero killer stain. The name itself felt like a stain on the very concept of heroism. And Hosa was where he operated. Hosa was also where Tenya Ida had chosen his internship. Izuku knew why. It was an open secret within their class, a truth Ida carried in the stiff, formal set of his shoulders and the cold, vengeful fire that had replaced the usual earnest light in his eyes. The hero killer's last victim had been the turbo hero, Ingenium. Ida's older brother, his idol, his reason for wanting to be a hero in the first place. Tensei Ida was now paralyzed from the waist down, his career shattered. Tenya had not gone to Hosa for experience. He had gone for revenge. Izuku had tried to talk to him before they left, but it was like talking to a wall of polished armor. Ida was polite, correct, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in a dark maze of grief and fury. The dread solidified into icy terror on the third night of the internship. Izuku and Gran Torino were on patrol, leaping across the rooftops of Shibuya, when Izuku's phone buzzed with a notification he had set up. It was a news alert, flagged for keywords. Hosu, villain attack, Nomu. Nomu? Izuku breathed, his blood running cold. He remembered the blank-eyed monstrosity from the USJ, the creature designed specifically to kill All Might. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message, from a number he didn't recognize, but the content was chillingly clear. It was a single pin, a drop location in a back alley of Hosa City. There was no message, no explanation. Just a set of coordinates. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that it was from Ida. A desperate, final cry for help from a friend who was in over his head. Gran Torino, I have to go, Izuku said, his voice tight with panic. He showed the old hero his phone. It's Ida. He's in Hosa. I think he found the hero killer. Gran Torino's expression, usually puckered with cantankerous energy, became instantly serious. Hosa is chaos right now, kid. The reports are saying there are multiple Noma-like creatures attacking the city center. It's a coordinated attack. He looked from the phone to Izuku's terrified face. This isn't a training exercise. I know, Izuku said, his hands already working, pulling the new pieces of his hero costume from his utility pack. He slipped on the reinforced gauntlets May had built, the satisfying thunk of the magnetic clasps echoing in the night air. He pulled the new cowl over his head, and the world resolved itself into the crisp, data-rich display of his visor. But he's my friend. I'm not leaving him. The commander was being called to his first real battle. Gran Torino let out a sharp sigh. Fine. But you're not going alone. This is bigger than some back-alley grudge match. Get your allies on the line. Now, Izuku's fingers flew across the comms panel on his gauntlet. He activated the secure channel he and May had designed. Uraraka, do you read me? This is Deku. Emergency channel. Static crackled for a heart-stopping second, then her voice, laced with concern, came through his earpiece. Deku-kun? I read you. What's wrong? I'm on patrol with Gahedin. No time to explain. Izuku cut in, his voice sharp and authoritative in a way that surprised even himself. I need you in Hosa. Now. I'm sending coordinates. Ida is in trouble. The hero killer. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Hosa? But the city's under attack. Gahed is being called in for support. I know. That's our cover. Find a way to get to the location I'm sending. I'm on my way, too. Stay off the main streets. Stick to the rooftops. Maintain radio silence unless you're at the rendezvous, Acknowledge, acknowledge, Commander. Uraraka's voice came back, a new steeliness in her tone. The title, once a training affectation, was now real. He got on the train, Gran Torino at his side, the old hero's silence a testament to the gravity of the situation. During the frantic journey, Izuku's mind was a whirlwind. He wasn't thinking about punches or smashes. He was thinking about sight lines, alleyway widths, enemy capabilities, and ally positioning. He pulled up a map of the coordinates Ida had sent, his visor superimposing it over his vision. It was a narrow, dead-end alley, surrounded by 3-story buildings. A perfect trap. Stain's quirk, as far as the limited reports suggested, was called bloodcurdle. He paralyzed his victims by ingesting their blood. The type of blood determined the duration of the paralysis. This meant he needed to inflict a cutting wound. He was a master of blades. Tactical analysis, Izuku's mind raced. Stain's objective is to injure and incapacitate. He's a specialist in close quarters, single-target elimination. Our objective is to rescue 2, possibly 3, individuals, Ida, and any pro he was with, from an expert duelist in an enclosed space. Direct confrontation is what Stain wants. We cannot give it to him. By the time the train screeched into a chaotic Hosa station, a plan, desperate and fragile, had begun to form. The city was a war zone. Smoke choked the air, sirens wailed, and in the distance, the guttural roar of a Noma echoed between the buildings. Izuku and Gran Torino burst out of the station, immediately taking to the rooftops, leaping through the smoke-filled night. Izuku's full cowl, that 5% hum of power, gave him the speed to keep up. He saw Uraraka first, a small figure in her distinctive pink and black costume, perched on the edge of a water tower 2 blocks from their target. She gave a sharp wave as he and Gran Torino landed beside her. The situation is bad, Uraraka reported, pointing toward the alley. I saw him drag the pro-hero native in there a few minutes ago. Then Ida went in. There was a lot of shouting, the sound of a fight, and then, it got quiet. Too quiet, Izuku's heart hammered. He was too late. Ida had already engaged. Okay, Izuku said, forcing his voice to remain steady. He was the commander. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Uraraka, you are our disruption asset. Your job is not to fight Stain. Your job is to fight the environment. Stain is a ground-based fighter. He needs leverage, he needs solid surfaces. I want you to make everything around that alley float. Garbage cans, loose bricks, parked cars, anything you can touch. Create a zero-gravity minefield. Make the battlefield unpredictable. Distract him. Do you understand? Uraraka looked from Izuku to the dark alley, her expression grim but determined. Make the ground unstable. Got it, Gran Torino, Izuku said, turning to the old hero. You're faster than him. You're the only one who can get in close and not get cut. You are the extraction team. Your goal is to get the wounded out, Ida first. Don't engage Stain unless you have to, Gran Torino grunted, a jet of air puffing from his boots. And what about you, kid? What's your role in this grand strategy? Izuku looked down into the alley. From their high vantage point, he could just make out the scene. It was worse than he'd imagined. The pro-hero native was slumped against the wall, bleeding from a cut on his arm. And Ida was on the ground, his pristine silver armor scratched and dented, a small, bloody gash on his shoulder. He was conscious, but he couldn't move, his face a mask of fury and helpless rage. And standing over him, 1 foot planted firmly on his chest, was the hero killer. Stain was terrifying. He was a figure woven from shadows and blades, his tattered red scarf like a bloody streamer in the faint light. His mask was a grotesque parody of a face, all teeth and empty eye holes, and his long, reptilian tongue darted out to lick a drop of blood from the tip of a wicked-looking katana. You are unworthy. Stain's voice rasped, a sound like gravel and dried blood. Like your brother, you wear the name of a hero, but your heart is filled with selfish vengeance. You are a disease, and I am the cure. He raised his sword, its edge glinting in the moonlight, preparing for a final, crippling blow. That's my cue, Izuku said, his voice cold and devoid of fear. He took a running start. I'm the commander. And the commander's call is to decide the moment of victory. He leaped from the roof. He didn't aim for Stain. He didn't aim for Ida. He aimed for the opposite wall of the narrow alley. He activated the grapple line in his left gauntlet. A high-tensile wire shot out, the magnetic head clamping onto a metal fire escape with a solid thwack. He swung down, a pendulum of green and black, his mind a crystalline point of focus. "Uraraka, now!" he yelled into his calm. On the roof, Uraraka slapped her hands down. A wave of pink energy washed over the alley's entrance. 2 large dumpsters, a motorcycle, and a pile of discarded crates lifted silently into the air, creating a floating, chaotic barrier. Stain, startled by the sudden voice from above and the bizarre floating debris, looked up. It was the only distraction they needed. In that split second of confusion, Gran Torino became a yellow blur, rocketing into the alley. He didn't attack Stain. He slammed into Ida, scooping him up and rebounding off the wall, carrying the paralyzed boy back toward the alley entrance in a single, fluid motion. "You!" Stain snarled, his attention snapping back, realizing he'd been tricked. He was fast, inhumanly so. He abandoned Ida and lunged toward Izuku, who was still swinging on his grapple line. His blade sliced through the air, aimed to sever the wire. But Izuku had anticipated this. He was the strategist. He had already plotted the vectors. He hit the retraction motor on his gauntlet. The wire zipped back, pulling him upward and out of the blade's path. He used the momentum to swing his legs forward, delivering a solid, 2-footed kick with his new iron soles against the brick wall. The impact was jarring, but it propelled him across the alley, over Stain's head. He was airborne, unpowered, and vulnerable. But he was exactly where he needed to be. He landed in a crouch beside the fallen form of the hero native. He was still out of Stain's immediate reach. The board was set. The pieces were in position. Now, it was time to bring in the queen. He looked over at Ida, who was now safely near the mouth of the alley with Gran Torino. Ida's eyes, wide with shock and shame, met his. He had failed. His quest for vengeance had nearly gotten him and another hero killed. He was paralyzed, helpless, the very picture of defeat. "Ida-kun!" Izuku's voice rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the tension. It wasn't a voice of pity or disappointment. It was a voice of command. A voice of absolute, unwavering faith. "You are Ingenium! You are the turbo hero! Your heart is that of a true hero, even if you lost your way for a moment. Your legs are the fastest, your discipline is the strongest. This fight is not over. Now stand up and take my power. Be the one to stop him." Izuku thrust his hand out. Gran Torino, understanding instantly, shoved Ida forward, pushing his paralyzed body within reach. Izuku lunged, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of Ida's gauntlet. The transfer was a lightning strike. Izuku collapsed against the wall, the familiar, terrifying void hollowing him out. His vision swam, the world turning a monochrome gray. He was a bystander now, weak and exposed. Ida, however, was reborn in a storm of emerald fire. The paralyzing effect of Stain's quirk shattered against the overwhelming flood of One for All. It was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a picket fence. The raw, untamed energy surged through Ida's veins, forcibly restarting his neural pathways, purging the paralysis in a violent, electric rush. He felt the power, 1,000 times more potent than in their controlled test, and this time, it was married to the white-hot fury and desperate shame churning in his soul. Green lightning, thick and furious, erupted from every seam of his armor. His calf engines, which had been cold and dormant, roared to life, glowing with an incandescent green light. He didn't just stand up. He exploded upward, the ground beneath his feet cracking from the sheer force of his movement. He looked at his own hands, buzzing with unimaginable power. He looked at Izuku, slumped and vulnerable against the far wall. He looked at Stain, whose reptilian eyes were wide with shock and disbelief at the sight of his paralyzed victim now crackling with godlike energy. All the shame, all the rage, all the grief for his brother, it all coalesced into a single, pure point of heroic resolve. Midoriya had trusted him. He had seen past his failure, and had given him this incredible second chance. He would not waste it. "Hero killer!" Ida's voice boomed, no longer the voice of a vengeful child, but the resonant, powerful voice of a true hero. You prey on the fallen. You hunt the wounded. You are no purger, you are a predator. And for the honor of my brother, and for all the true heroes you have defiled, I will stop you, Stain sneered, recovering his composure. Big words from a fake who needed a power-up from a friend. That power is not your own. You are unworthy. He lunged, a blur of motion, his katana aimed for Ida's neck. But he was no longer fast enough. Ida didn't even seem to move. One moment he was standing still, the next he was behind Stain, a solid, immovable object. It is not the source of the power that makes a hero, he declared, his voice calm and cold. It is how they choose to use it. He activated his engines. He didn't use a full reciprocal burst. He didn't need to. He channeled a controlled, devastating 20% of one for all into his legs. He called it what it was, a fusion of his legacy and his friend's trust. Reciprocal burst smash! He didn't just kick. It was a series of precise, lightning-fast blows, each one landing with the concussive force of a sledgehammer. The first kick shattered Stain's katana into a dozen pieces. The second slammed into his armored chest, audibly cracking his ribs. A third and fourth strike targeted his knee and elbow, not to cripple, but to disarm and disable. Each impact was punctuated by a miniature sonic boom that rattled the entire alley. Stain was utterly, completely overwhelmed. He was a master duelist fighting a hurricane. He couldn't track the movements, couldn't block the blows. He was tossed around the alley like a rag doll, his blades scattered, his body battered. From his position on the ground, Izuku watched, his mind cataloging the fight through his visor's display. He saw Ida's controlled fury, the perfect fusion of his own disciplined fighting style with the raw power of One for All. He wasn't fighting wildly. He was fighting with purpose, with precision. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was victory. With a final, powerful kick to the head, Ida sent the hero killer flying into the far wall, where he crumpled in an unconscious heap. Silence descended on the alley, broken only by Ida's heavy, steaming breaths and the distant sirens. The green lightning around him slowly faded as he powered down, leaving him standing there, trembling from the adrenaline and the residual power. He looked at his hands, then over at Izuku, who was being helped to his feet by a stunned but impressed Gran Torino. The power began to flow back into Izuku, filling the void, bringing warmth and color back to his world. Uraraka floated down from the roof, her eyes wide with awe. Ida-kun, you were incredible. Gran Torino finished, giving Ida a sharp, appraising look. Ida walked over to Izuku, his movements stiff and sore. He stood before his friend, his helmet hiding his expression. Midoriya-kun, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I am in your debt. I was lost. I was a disgrace to my brother's name. You did not give up on me. That's what commanders do, Izuku said, his voice still a little shaky from the transfer. He offered a small, tired smile. They have faith in their unit. Especially when they can't have faith in themselves. The weight of the moment was broken by the arrival of other pro-heroes, drawn by the commotion. They found a bizarre scene. The notorious hero killer, Stain, beaten and unconscious, 2 students from UA, and a retired legend standing over him, and the hero native, wounded but safe. The official story would be a chaotic mess, but the truth was clear to the 4 of them who had lived it. It was a victory. Not a victory of a single, mighty hero. It was a victory of strategy, of trust, of teamwork. It was a victory forged by a boy who had learned that his greatest strength was not in his own fists, but in the heart of his friends. Izuku Midoriya, the commander, had just won his first war.